to rethink our relationship with food, because whether we like it or not, or whether this is the ideal paradigm or not, we often do focus on the fact that we're not consuming food during this time. So firstly, what do we eat, or what should we eat rather? So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu kulu min tayyibati ma razaqnakum. So eat of the pure provisions, or the tayyibat, from what we have provided for you. And what I want to focus on here is the idea of pure food, or food that comes from the earth. We all know that it's healthier to eat whole foods, vegetables, fruits, etc., things that come from the earth. But what I want to ask us is, what are what are the negatives and what are the downsides to eating food that has been processed, or that's been divorced from, that's been removed from its context, its natural context? So we know that, for example, eating a lot of candy is unhealthy for us. But do we think about, for example, the negative effects of eating commercialized bread that's sold in a supermarket, that has perhaps added sugar added to it, that's produced using commercialized yeast rather than natural yeast that is naturally found on wheat and naturally found in the air we breathe and in nature? Beyond just the health effects and how we might personally be negatively affected by eating impure food, or food that has been processed, or has added sugars, or has added chemicals, I think it's also important to consider the environmental and thus sort of worldly cost of eating processed foods, and increasing demand for the production of processed foods. So we know they're unhealthy for us, but then what is the environmental cost of all these factories that are producing these foods? We're not talking about small mom and pop bakeries where people are coming in and mixing up bread dough every morning and putting it in the oven and as a means of providing for themselves. We're talking about, large industrialized factories where like hundreds of thousands of loaves of bread and bags of chips and candies are produced day in and day out, and where a lot of that stuff, first of all, has a long shelf life, so it's sitting on market shelves forever. And then it also becomes cheaper because of the demand, becomes cheaper to produce than natural foods. So then you end up with food deserts and places in inner cities where people don't have access to fresh foods because it's cheaper to stock these foods with a longer shelf life and than it is to have refrigerators with fruits and vegetables that are going to be going bad. So you have this entire system that is being harmed, that is perpetuating this negative cycle of these negative foods that are bad for our health being produced, and they're harming the environment while they're being produced, and then they're ending up being the primary means of nutrition for underserved communities and impoverished communities. So what does all of this mean? Mass farming, factories, inhumane conditions for animals. I'm not trying to, the reason I'm asking these questions isn't to suggest that we all drop what we're doing and become food activists or environmental activists, but I want us to reflect on sort of the effects of these systems on our society and on the people around us and on the world around us, and also on ourselves spiritually. So because we can't all be food activists or climate activists, what can we do in order to combat these systems? Does anyone have any ideas? You can put them in the chat or, oops. I actually think it's like, I'm not sure how to check the chat. So maybe we'll revisit any chat responses nearer to the end, inshallah. But I think, again, these things are really complicated, and there's a lot you could read, a lot you could watch, a lot of like competing interests in, you know, our food system. But I do think that thinking about the way our food is produced and the way we perpetuate the systems by continuing to purchase these foods and rely on these means of production is an Islamic issue at its core. And if we don't think about this, and if we don't implement changes even on a minute level in our own lives, then I believe we're participating in a non-Islamic system. So this is an idea that I want to drive in, is that it's not only about the massive effect or the structural effect. So we're always told, you know, like, climate change isn't something that individual consumers can change, which is 100% true. You know, you opting to recycle isn't going to change, you know, the level of plastic pollution that we have in this world and the way it's like ravaging our ocean water and our soil. But it can have a spiritual effect on you and a psychological effect on your attitude towards preserving the earth and being a vicegerent of Allah on earth. So how can we make positive changes in food systems? So one of the things I mentioned on the slide before was the effects of, you know, inhumane practices towards animals and the challenges involved in the amount of meat we consume as a society. And as a Muslim community, I mean, I think we're not exempt from that. If anything, we're one of the worst perpetrators of that because we consume so much meat. And there's a really nice saying by Ali bin Abi Talib, and he says, "Do not make your stomach a graveyard for animals." And what this means, there's a preface to this saying, and it's that Ali bin Abi Talib would not eat meat very frequently. And how many of our iftars this Ramadan feature meat as the main course, if not a feature of multiple courses? So that's one way we can make a positive impact, not only on the system, which is excessive meat production and inhumane treatment of animals, but also on the spiritual effects of us consuming too much meat. So in multiple hadith, it's said that consuming too much meat has negative effects on you spiritually. And it's actually prescribed by many scholars, among them Imam al-Ghazali, that if you have certain proclivities, if you're struggling with certain proclivities towards certain sins, that you should limit your meat consumption. So that's one way you can have an effect on both the system and on yourself spiritually. Another way is to make your own food or involve yourself somehow in the process of creating food. A lot of the times, you know, we're so used to living in excess and living in abundance that it's, you know, it's completely inconceivable to us that we would ever have to grow our own tomatoes or grow our own potatoes or ever have to live without a certain type of food. You know, can you imagine going to the grocery store and not being able to find, I don't know, like something very standard like carrots? Like, when have you ever ventured to the grocery store and not found carrots or onions? When in reality, these things, and in different parts of the world, are only available certain times of year. And I think, you know, I'm not suggesting that we can fundamentally change, our food system here in America overnight, we can practice gratitude by developing a relationship with the food we eat, whether that's cooking our own food, appreciating the process of food being made, or even growing our own food through a garden or things like that. So small changes are still changes. That's sort of the point I'm trying to arrive at. And developing a relationship with the earth, which is something that I believe we're completely removed from, unfortunately. Okay, so we talked a little bit about what we eat and where what we eat comes from. I now want to talk about the how of eating. And so this verse of the Quran, I'm sure many of you have heard already. O children of Adam, dress well when attending the mosques, and eat and drink, but do not be excessive. Indeed, Allah does not love those who are excessive in what they do. So, kulu washrabu wa la tusrifu, inna Allah la yuhibbul musrifin. And so, what I want to focus on here is what it means to be excessive. Because excess means something very different to us living in a society where abundance is the name of the game. We've never known anything but abundance. We've never known anything but the ability to sort of attain any material thing we want at will. So excessiveness is not a functional concept to us. And what I mean by that is that we are not necessarily harming other people by being excessive, because it's not as though if we buy too many, apples at the supermarket, there aren't going to be enough apples for everyone else. That's not the type of negative impact of excessiveness that we face, because we live in a society that's so abundant in food. But excessiveness still has a spiritual effect on us, on our ethos, on our spiritual well-being, on our attitude towards food. So there's a hadith attributed to the Prophet ﷺ where he's passing someone while they're doing wudu at a river, at a flowing river. And the Prophet passes by and he says, "What is this excess?" And sorry, trying to move this little icon. Anyway, his companion responds, "How is there excess with water when I'm performing wudu, when there's plenty of water?" And the Prophet says, even when you are on the banks of a flowing river, there is excess in performing the wudu. And there are different permutations of this hadith, and in one of them, I think the Prophet ﷺ says, do not waste even a drop of water, even if you're at a flowing river. And the idea here sort of drives this point home, is that excessiveness is not just about the functional consequence of being excessive. So at a river, you're not going to be harming anyone by using as much water as you want, but you are going to be harming your own self, your own soul by being excessive, because you're getting yourself used to this culture of just excess and abundance. Another example, the Prophet ﷺ, when he would eat, he would said to wipe the bowl of his food clean. It was said he would use his 3 fingers and wipe his food clean. This is another example where not wiping your plate clean is not going to yield any negative effects in the world. It's not an external excessiveness that's going to be negatively impacting people outside yourself. It's about your attitude of gratitude or of ingratitude towards the food that is available to you. So the difference is internal, spiritual. It's about our attitude. How do we eat continued? So it's been reported that the Prophet ﷺ would never eat alone. So he would always eat in company. And to me, the subtle sort of wisdom in this knowledge is kind of astonishing, because I think of times, when I was in college or whatever, that maybe I wanted to grab lunch or dinner in a dining hall, and none of my friends were available to eat, or I don't know, I was studying for a test or something, and it happened that I was eating alone. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but there's something so sad about that. Or even when I'm in a restaurant and I'm with a group of people, but I see someone else like sitting and eating by themselves. Like there's something just fitrawi, or like internal in me, that balks at that thinks like this is unnatural. Like it's not. It's sad. It's not nice for someone to be eating alone. And the Prophet ﷺ like shared this sentiment. To him, eating was a social time. Food was for sharing. Meal times were a time to build a community, to be with other people, to converse, to laugh. It was a social time. And he himself would not eat alone as long as it could be helped. So, of course, this is difficult, and it can be difficult for many of us now during the coronavirus pandemic. And so, two things. Number one, if you're lucky enough to be living with your family, or to be living with your spouse, or living with roommates during this time, then that's a really big blessing. And there's something so special about breaking your fast and having iftar with people you love around you. And if you are so lucky and you know people who aren't, then perhaps you should be making an effort to have Zoom iftars with other people, and keeping up this prophetic sunnah of making meal times community times. And then hopefully, inshallah, we can all actualize that. And this other hadith is also, I find, really incredible, mashallah. When the Holy Prophet ﷺ would eat with people, he would be the first to start eating and the last to stop, so that everyone else could eat without feeling embarrassed. And just, it's really amazing, because I wonder how many of us approach, even something like meal times with this level of knowledge of human psychology and this level of consideration for other people. Like we've all been, I'm sure we've all said things along the lines of, oh, keep eating, like, please, like, help yourselves. But to have such a fundamental understanding of human psychology, to know that the best way to make people comfortable and encourage people to eat until they're full is for me to be eating myself, to make people feel that they're doing something that's part of the group activity. They're not being singled out by continuing their eating. I just think it's a real testament to the akhlaq of the Prophet ﷺ, but also his the depth of nuance of his knowledge of human psychology. And I hope like the lesson we take from it is to be sort of conscious about the ways that our behaviors affect other people, even when we're doing something like sharing a meal. Like this is saying nothing about the fact that he would, when people spoke to him during a meal, he would turn his body towards them fully. And he would never sort of like look at someone over his shoulder, or turn only halfway. If someone addressed him, he would turn fully. If there wasn't a seat, if someone came in and there was a gathering and there wasn't a seat, he would stand and offer them his seat. So, there are a lot of sort of etiquettes that we can draw lessons from and think about when we're having meals or when we're in gatherings generally. Excuse me, my throat is getting dry. So how much do we eat? This is another sort of theme that features commonly in the hadith, that there is a really big emphasis on not overeating in the hadith. Like, this is something that featured really prominently in the Prophet's life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and something he was careful to stress very often. He says, "We are a community that does not eat until we become hungry, and when we eat, we do not satiate ourselves." And what he means by that is that you do not eat until you're stuffed. And that is sort of the ultimate way to go about eating. And another one, the Prophet ﷺ said, "A human being fills no worse vessel than his stomach. It is sufficient for a human being to eat a few mouthfuls to keep his spine straight. But if he must fill his stomach, it should be 1/3 food, 1/3 for drink, and 1/3 for air." Sorry, I'm going to just check the chat briefly. Okay. Yeah, and sort of the takeaway from this is that, number one, food should not be consumed just for the sake of consumption. We should be mindful when we're eating, but also that it just so happens that there are physical benefits to eating less. And this is just, I don't know how many of you have heard of the Okinawa Diet, but there's something called blue zones. So places in the world where people live longer and have better health outcomes, and often live to, basically, these parts of the world have the largest percentages of people who live to be over 100 years old and have good health outcomes, like the least occurrences of cancer, cardiovascular diseases. And one of these people are the Okinawa people. They're located in Japan. And they have a saying, "Hara hachibu," which means eat until you're 80% full. And this is something they teach their children from when they're very young. And I just thought it was interesting because it's very similar to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ saying, fill your stomach with 1/3 food, 1/3 drink, and 1/3 air. So basically 66% fullness. Of course, we don't limit our following of the Sunnah of the Prophet or of Islam to when it coincides with science. Islam seeks a balance between the physical and metaphysical world. It seeks to optimize both of these sort of realms of our existence, whereas science describes purely physical phenomena. But we do see often that Islamic principles do have physical benefits. Fasting, I won't dwell on this too long because, number one, I'm running out of time, but also because I'm sure we have heard about the health benefits of fasting over and over and over again this month. But like I was saying, fasting is prescribed primarily, for a spiritual reason, so that you may become لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you may become righteous, so that you may practice self-restraint. But as many of us have heard, the physical benefits of fasting are numerous, and one that I will mention briefly is a process called autophagy, which is basically the cleaning out of the cells of our body. So basically, as our cells go about their normal processes, they often accumulate junk, for lack of a better word. And they're only able to sort of clean themselves out and undergo this sort of cellular power wash when we are fasting. So after about 12 hours or more of no eating, that's when our cells are able to sort of stop the process of digestion and metabolism and are able to actually clean themselves out. And this has been linked to decreased risk of Parkinson's, decreased risk of cancer, increased longevity, etc. Takeaways. So this was, just a very small, short introduction to the ways that Islam comments on our relationship to food and the ways that we can improve our relationship with food and improve our consciousness of the food we eat, improve our gratitude for the process of creating food and eating it. And hopefully, we can approach food with clear mind, clear heart, and nourish our bodies with healthy, pure food for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and rethink how the food we eat and the food decisions we make affect the world around us and affect the environment. I do want to say, I just want to, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat. But I do have to also mention, for those of you who don't know, that if you go to ICNYU.org, we have, let me share my screen. I have one question. Assalamu alaikum. Is reducing our meat intake considered sunnah? So yes, it is considered to be a practice that many scholars throughout history have recommended for different spiritual ailments, but also generally to increase sort of your spirituality, in the same sense of fasting has been recommended. So to reduce your meat intake has been prescribed by many scholars for specific spiritual ailments, but it's also been prescribed generally as a way to not make yourself too addicted to the pleasures of this world. It is, however, also not recommended to eliminate your meat intake altogether. The Prophet ﷺ would eat meat and he would enjoy eating meat, but he would not eat it on a daily basis. So that's generally the advice that I've seen. Milk intake. Milk is actually one of the Prophet ﷺ's favorite foods. It's considered to be very healthy and nourishing. However, I would encourage us all to think about the dairy industry today and the difference between milk that comes from cows who are properly nourished and who are allowed to graze and have proper living conditions, and milk that is mass produced by corporations today and that contains lots of hormones and antibiotics that are pumped into the cows, and cows that are not fed proper meals. So if inshallah, like, it is something we're able to take into consideration and something we're able to afford, I would look into investing in milk that is produced from farms that have ethical practices for their cows, that grass feed their cows, that don't give their cows hormones and antibiotics, if that's something we can afford, inshallah. But there's milk has a very, very sort of prominent place in the tradition. Thank you to the sister who asked. Someone asked about the PowerPoints. I'm happy to share. If anyone would like my PowerPoints, I'm going to put my email in the chat and you can just email me privately. Oops. And I'm happy to, yes, I just sent my email in the chat. So anyone else who has any questions or who would like the PowerPoints, you can feel free to email me. Last thing before I end is that I'm just going to show you really quickly the ICNYU website. So for anyone who doesn't know, all the virtual events and classes that are being offered are now, if you go to ICNYU/Ramadan, or you can click on this Ramadan link right here, and then you scroll down, and we have sort of a 9-day list of all the events that are being offered and all the Zoom classes. So as you can see, there are many, many, many Zoom events. And then there is also, if you are, we are still collecting donations for our coronavirus relief initiative. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the link. Give me one moment. Okay. I'm just going to paste the link in the chat. And that is for the ICNYU Coronavirus Emergency Response donation link. And if you're able to, please donate at the link. And Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for listening. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me in the chat. And may your fast be accepted. And assalamu alaikum. Oh, thank you. Someone just asked in the chat.